Welcome to one of the most haunted buildings on the eastern seaboard, the Peyton Randolph House. Over 24 people have died in or around Peyton Randolph House since it was built in 1715, and many of them remain to haunt the home today. The Randolph House was once featured on USA Today as one of the US's most haunted buildings. It was purchased by Sir John Randolph, the only colonial Virginian to receive knighthood, in 1721. He later purchased the eastern lot in 1724. After his death, the home was willed to one of his young sons, Peyton Randolph. Peyton is one of our founding fathers, cousin to Thomas Jefferson, and he served as president on the First and Second Continental Congresses. The house's troubles seemed to start with the outbreak of the Revolutionary War. The governor of Williamsburg at the time, Lord Dunmore, made the proclamation that any slave that abandoned his rebellious owner to help the British would regain their freedom at the end of the war. Well, the war ended, and these runaway slaves were returned to their owners. One of the slaves that was being returned, was Eve, and Mrs. Randolph's personal slave. Mrs. Randolph treated her harshly when she returned. And then when Mrs. Randolph died, Eve was sold, and that forever separated her from her son. That marks the beginning of misfortune at the Peyton Randolph house. Two men shot each other in a quarrel they were having at the home. Children fell and died years apart from one another. And a war veteran died mysteriously within the house. In fact, the earliest ghostly reportings are from a written account of the Marquis de Lafayette himself. In 1824, he went on a grand tour through the United States to talk to war veterans. And when he was in Williamsburg, he stayed at the Peyton Randolph house. He wrote, "Upon my arrival, as I entered through the foyer, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It nudged me as if intending to keep me from entering. I quickly turned, but found no one there. The nights were not restful, as the sounds of voices kept me awake for most of my stay." Far more recently, in the 1960s, the house served as an overflow dorm for students of William and Mary. A young man was reported to feel a light tugging on his arm as he slept, at first believing himself to be dreaming. That hopeful belief was dashed as the bed began to shake violently, and he started up out of the bed to find the room empty. That student fled, and he refused to come back for his belongings. The next story is that of a local security guard, dutifully performing his rounds. When he found himself in the Peyton Randolph house's basement, the whole of the house filled with an otherworldly roar. He tried to flee, but found some invisible presence gripping him by the ankles and anchoring him to the ground. The guard desperately radioed for help, and 10 minutes later it arrived. The guards that came to help him found the door wedged shut. They had to force it open, and when they did, the original guard was set free from his trap. That story is used when they're training guards as to what to expect in the Peyton Randolph house. The next haunting, or the next most recent haunting, is what happened in the eastern side of the house to your right. A woman used to live in this section of the house. When she lived there, she would call security all the time, saying that she heard children crying. After she passed away, the fire alarm went off in this part of the building, and no one could get in there. They didn't have access to the property and had to break a window. Once they did gain access, they found the fire extinguisher sitting in the middle of the room. Fire extinguisher material was not on the walls, not on any other part of the room, and did not go out of the room. And there were no footprints on top of the material to suggest that an intruder was inside, and they looked for an intruder. When they came to the fire extinguisher and picked it up, there was a perfect clean round circle around it. No, the floor hadn't even been touched under that round circle. They never found the pin. And we still can't explain how the fire extinguisher made its way into the middle of the house, expended all of its contents in a neat and clean pattern while apparently remaining stationary on the floor without any footprints around it. We have the video interviews from the security guards who have experienced these events. We have them on our website and our YouTube page, so please do check them out. So why is the Peyton Randolph so haunted? Well, we did some research, which is on our blog in full detail. In 1930s, during an excavation of the area, two archaeologists working in colonial Williamsburg wrote in their report that there were two Indians buried on the eastern lot of the Randolph house, and they should not be disturbed. One shallow dig in the property uncovered Native American property on the lot, although they did not dig deep enough, only about 8 inches, to discover more. In addition, the homes that occupied the area had constructed large basements that would have destroyed many native remains. An interview with the people who lived in the homes stated that they knew that Indian artifacts and graves were under and around their property. In fact, one woman had demanded that she be allowed to keep some of the valuables, which included Indian pottery. Her daughter said, "Well, Mother was upset and called them up and said the artifacts belonged to her and she wanted them back. They told her that anything they dug up she could have." In 1941, the National Park Service dug under the eastern side of the Randolph house to build the tunnel for the National Historic Parkway, disturbing the 2 documented Indian graves. The tunnel runs under the eastern side of the Randolph property. Since the home was built in 1715, and given that 2 graves were found alongside of it, it's only natural to assume that many other Native Americans were buried under and around the Randolph house. This is the best explanation for the early hauntings of the home and for its strong paranormal activity that gives it the title of the most haunted house in Williamsburg. We were once leading a tour near the Randolph house, and 6 of the tour group were carrying EMF detectors. When we stopped to speak about the history of the house, each and every EMF detector went from fully charged to dead. Also, people complain of their phones losing power or freezing and needing to be rebooted. Most frightening of all, on a dark and balmy summer night, the temperature suddenly dropped at least 20 degrees. It went from uncomfortably hot to frigid in a matter of seconds. Every last person in the group felt the change in the temperature, and it makes me uncomfortable to think what was passing through. In addition, we have several guests pass out in front of the building each year, and we have to call the paramedics to aid them. Our late night ghost tours, boy, they're full of spirit box activity. Unfortunately, the voices we hear through the box are only insistent on one thing. They always tell us to leave. Leave! Go away! Sometimes politely, sometimes using a variety of colorful phrases. One of the tour guides was even sworn at by the spirit box. Thank you.